So this morning we will do a short teaching on the topic of the 4 parts of yoga. So the yogis explain that there is an experiential state which is called suffering, samsara. So all of us which are experiencing being an individual experience suffering. This suffering, the yogis say, is based in something which is called ignorance. Ignorance means simply that we experience ourselves to be limited by the mind and the body and the world, basically by everything that we experience. And the analogy that is given is like if you have a cup, it seems that there is space inside the cup, limited inside the cup, but actually the cup is abiding in space. There is no space in the cup. In the same way, it seems that there is a self inside the mind and the body. But that's exactly the same type of ignorance. Because we are ignorant of the true nature of space, it seems to be limited by the cup. Because we are ignorant of the true nature of the self, it seems to be limited by the mind and the body. And the meaning is that all thoughts, emotions, physical attributes, etc., seem to become a limitation for us. We experience being limited by them, conditioned by them, and according to the yogis, this is what is called suffering. So suffering is not the experience of things. So pain in itself is not the suffering. Negative emotions themselves are not the suffering. The sense of being limited by them is the suffering. This is the idea. So being limited, being conditioned by experience, experience itself is the conditioning. This is called suffering, according to the yogis. And suffering arises from a state of ignorance, not being aware of who we truly are, right? So how can we free the space from its limitation to the bottle, right? If I open the bottle, I see bottle space, right? There is bottle space inside, right? So how can I free the bottle space from the bottle, right? So the only way I can do it is by knowing that there is no space in the bottle, right? There is no interiority to the space in the bottle. There's no space in the bottle. The bottle is in space. Space is infinite. Okay, nothing can limit it. So it's only knowing the true nature of space which will liberate the space from its limitation. Okay? So we are in the same state according to the yogis, exactly the same. Actually, the self is not really limited, but there is something which is called ignorance, which is not really there. It's like a mirage, by which we seem to be confined by our mind and body. This is the idea. Then, the yogis teach that because we are ignorant, we identify with the changes of the mind and the body, right? And then, for example, we say, I am growing my hair, right? Or I'm growing my beard, right? So you see people, you can hear people saying, I'm growing my hair, right? So how exactly are you growing your hair, right? Many people would like to know, right? So, right, if someone found the secret of growing the hair, right, so many people would benefit. So Lord Jesus puts it very nicely. He says, you cannot turn one hair on your head gray, but the number of hairs on your head are numbered. which means the divine intelligence is so vast that even the number of hairs on the head are accounted for. But the individual cannot even turn one of those hairs gray. So the idea is that we have the sense that the yogis call it, we are the doer and the enjoyer of the changes of the mind and the body. Because we are identified with the limitations of the mind and the body, we think that we are generating all these actions in the mind and the body. That's called doership. Then as long as we are experiencing being the doer, the yogis say our task is to purify the mind, to purify the vehicle by which we know, because when we purify the mind from its impurities, we are going to understand the nature of the self much better, which will lead us to becoming free from the apparent bondage to the mind and the body. So therefore, the first stage, the yogis say, is to purify the mind. Okay, what is the mind? According to the yogis, the mind, it's called antakarana, the instrument of knowledge. That by which we know is the mind. Not that by which we are aware. That by which we experience. That's the meaning. Okay, so like we have the eyes by which we know visually, we have the mind which is the instrument of experiencing. Okay, this is the idea. Then, what does it mean to purify the mind? So the yogis say like this: the purification of the mind is primarily from two forces which are offshoots of ignorance, which are called raga and dvesha. Raga means attraction, dvesha means aversion. Okay? So why? Because this raga and dvesha, they intensify the sense of the independent, separate reality of all the objects of the world and of the self. Okay? So, for example, that's a very simple example, but a very good example. Let's say that you just completed a very nice yoga class and you are very spacious. You experience spaciousness and you look at all the beautiful gardens and you say, everything is Brahman. You are lost in Brahman. You have this very spacious experience. And then someone passes by the pathway and they tell you, there is breakfast. Are you coming for breakfast? But you are so lost in your spacious experience, you say, yes, I will come. I'll take my time. And then another person comes and says, you know, there is breakfast. Yeah, I know. But there is pizza. And the moment you hear pizza, you lose all your spaciousness and, right, Brahman is totally gone, right? You don't even remember the yoga class. And suddenly, you are very worried, right? Because you are afraid, right? Lest you're going to miss the pizza. So now it becomes real business. And you are, right, straight away with your yoga mat. You don't go through the room, directly to the kitchen, right? Why? Because pizza is very real. See, why is it real? Because of the desire for it, raga. So either if we have attraction or aversion for objects, they become very real for us. When objects become very real, the ego becomes very real, the experiencer. And this is how samsara goes about. Swami Sivananda says, it is raga and dvesha which make the world real. Okay, so this samsara, this world of experiencing of pleasure and pain by which we are limited, is governed by these two forces of raga and dvesha. So they need to be purified. How are they purified? So there is karma yoga, bhakti yoga, and raja yoga. These are the yogas by which we purify the mind. Basically, we are purifying this raga and dvesha. This is the idea. So in karma yoga, we learn to perform selfless actions. What does it mean? The ego is acting selfishly, naturally, which means the ego acts upon raga and dvesha. The ego will do things which it finds pleasing, and it will avoid things which it finds unpleasing. Okay? So this raga and dvesha translate into our actions. So then the yogis tell us, if we are acting through this raga and dvesha, we are only entangling ourselves more and more in suffering. You see, we think we are securing our happiness. Actually, we are securing more and more limitation and entanglement. This is what is happening. Therefore, it's not so wise. Therefore, the yogis say, act, but without attachment. Meaning, find a vision, an understanding that will allow you to act for higher goals, not for this raga and dvesha, which cause entanglement in the sense of the ego. So the yogis say, surrender your actions to God, right? So understand that the whole reality is the Lord, the one reality. And then act with surrendering your actions to that reality, so that your actions promote your understanding or connection to that reality. So rather than acting from raga and dvesha, act from the sense, for example, of duty, dharma, what needs to be done. Why does it need to be done? It's part of the will of the Lord. We call it dharma. So it, just like the body is governed by the will, and everything in the body performs what the will governs, in the same way, the whole creation is under the will of Ishvara. Performing one's duty in surrender to Ishvara frees us from our egotistic notions of raga and dvesha. And then we can even develop love for Ishvara, because Ishvara is of the nature of love. And then this leads to surrender. So we feel, while we are acting, we feel a sense that we are surrendered to that Supreme Being. And out of love, we offer everything to that being. So this is called karma yoga. And karma yoga leads us to bhakti yoga, where we perform actions out of love for God, out of pure love. Why is that so important? Because if we are acting out of love, if our heart is full of love, then we don't want anything from the situation or the person we are interacting with. See? So if our heart is already full of love, selfless love, then we don't want the person to thank us, acknowledge us. We don't want any reward, because love is already free. So this is called Bhakti Yoga. Bhakti Yoga allows us to abide in that freedom, which is our nature, right? So it is said in the scriptures of Bhakti Yoga that Bhakti or love is its own reward, which means when we taste, when we experience love, we are already rewarded. The result is already in the love. We don't need anything. Therefore, we are free. This is Bhakti. Bhakti allows us to act and be free, not be bound by, again, this raga and dvesha, which make this world of samsara very real. Then, love leads to meditation, because when we love God, our mind becomes absorbed in God. And then, naturally, the mind becomes more and more contemplative, which means it dwells in the presence of God. more and more and more. So therefore, love leads to meditation. Meditation means the mind is actively dwelling in the presence of God. So Swami Vishnudevananda says, when the mind is impure, it's filled with raga and dvesha, whenever we freeze the mind, like to take a shot, what's in the mind? So there will be not too much surprises. It will be pizza, ice cream, and banana. This is the idea. The mind is juggling between those things. But then when the mind becomes more and more pure, then we are going to find the mind more and more and more dwelling in the presence of God. This is the idea. Why? Because this raga and dvesha, which send the mind to the world, are diminishing, and the mind naturally gravitates towards its source. This is the idea. So the more the mind is disentangling from the objects, the mind will naturally move towards the source, which is consciousness, which is of the nature of freedom or bliss. So now this is called the path of action. Why is this the path of action? Because we are ignorant, because we identify with the limitations of the mind and the body. You see, everyone knows that the goal of life is happiness, right? No one needs to be told. But what does it mean the goal of life is happiness? Does it mean that we want to spend our life 80, 90, whatever years, and then at the end we are going to have a reception into the hall of happiness? See? No. You see, when we said that the goal of life is happiness, the meaning is that's the goal of every single action. That's the meaning. So Lord Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita says, every path that man treads is my path. It leads to me. Why? Because we always try to do things to increase our sense of happiness. Now, the path of happiness, the path of action, is the path where we translate happiness into doing, which means I need to do this to attain that. That's called the path of action. When we are ignorant, we are naturally understanding happiness, which is the goal, as action. Right? So initially we understand, go to the grocery store, you'll attain happiness. Right? And then we translate it, serve others, you will attain happiness. Then increase your devotion, you'll develop happiness. Then meditate, you'll get happiness. This is the path of action because it's do something and get something in return, and that something hopefully will be increasing your level of happiness. That's called the path of action. Then, when the mind becomes sufficiently pure through dwelling in the presence of God, gradually we realize that that presence is our own self. What we experience as I am, the knower, is that presence, and it's all pervading. It's not in the body, it's everywhere. This is called discrimination, viveka. When viveka dawns, we are entering the path of knowledge. Not because we graduate the path of action, and then again we are entering the hall of fame, and someone gives us a diploma and says, you graduated, and then there is a sign, the path of knowledge, and we go there, right? This is not the meaning. It's a natural evolution. The moment we develop discrimination, we realize that the freedom of abiding in the self is that happiness. And then naturally, happiness becomes a mode of separating the self from the non-self. Separating the self from the apparent limitations becomes happiness. And getting lost in the limitations because of raga and dvesha becomes pain. So rather than doing and getting some objects for happiness, Now happiness is a method by which we are separating the real from the unreal, the self from the non-self, and this gives us the peace of happiness. When the mind is again lost in the habitual raga and vesha, we go back into suffering. So therefore, the path of knowledge is characterized by the fact that now, instead of doing, happiness means knowing. Knowing the self is happiness, forgetting the self is pain. It's a natural evolution when discrimination dawns. And then we are on the quest of more and more abiding in the self. That's called the path of knowledge, which will end in the permanent abiding in the self, which is freedom. So, and this is called Jnana Yoga, the path of knowledge, which is a natural evolution of the first three yogas, which have to do with the purification of the mind. So this is how the yogis are explaining the four parts of yoga. Now we're going to conclude.